I'm Jim Smith. I'm an emeritus professor of neuroscience at the Florida State University. I'm here today to tell you about Dr. Robert O. Lawton. Many people know that name, but he was killed over 40 years ago, and so most people don't know much about him. I was a colleague and a close friend, and I want to tell you my story about Bob Lawton. Each year, upon the recommendation of an appointed faculty committee, the president of the Florida State University presents a Robert O. Lawton Distinguished Professor. This is the highest honor that the Florida State University gives to a faculty member for scholarship, research, teaching, and service. The award is named for Robert O. Lawton. Bob Lawton died in the fall of 1980 as a result of injuries received in an automobile accident. At the time of his death, he was serving the university as provost under President Bernard Schleicher. In conversations with two recently appointed Lawton professors, neither of them had started their career at Florida State University prior to Bob's death. They never met him, and they only knew of him. I'm sure that's true for many other faculty and staff around the university. I first met Bob Lawton in 1956 and had a close relationship with him until his death. I remain in contact with his surviving children, especially his daughter, Elise Bates Lawton Smith. With the encouragement of my friend and colleague, Mark Riley, I have recorded my memories of Bob Lawton, and I've encouraged others to do the same, those who were old enough around here to have known Bob Lawton. I hope this will enable future colleagues to know that this great man's name is associated with the highest faculty honor for good reason. I'm going to begin with some information about how I met Bob Lawton and a little background in terms of why I was where I was when this occurred. I had completed my undergraduate education at Auburn University with a major in mathematics in 1950 and had enrolled at Florida State University in the graduate program in guidance and counseling. I'm going to introduce you to a few people who were here then because they play a role in this story. Dr. Hugh Wascom was chairman of the psychology department. And another very important character in this story was Joshua Paul Reynolds. Reynolds came to Florida State University around 1950 and was a professor of zoology and associate dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. He moved here from Birmingham Southern College, where I once had been an undergraduate student. A mutual friend at Birmingham Southern asked Dr. Reynolds to look after me and to mentor me. Dean Reynolds also had looked after and mentored Bob Lawton. So that is the connection that we had at the very beginning. I had a teaching assistantship and was teaching general psychology from the time I arrived at FSU in the fall of 1950. In order to earn extra money, I soon discovered and began to teach in the bootstrap program. And I'll say this about the bootstrap program, that it was something that Paul Reynolds had cooked up, where FSU faculty and teaching assistants would commute to nearby military bases and offer undergraduate credit to the officers and enlisted men. You could teach in this program because the bases that they started with were within 100 miles of Tallahassee, and you could commute there once a week and pick up a little bit of extra money. Under Dr. Reynolds' guidance, this program grew and began to include other military bases more than 100 miles away from the campus. Included were bases at Fort Lawton Beach, Florida, Panama, and Puerto Rico. Needless to say, those bases required live faculty to cover the courses and to live on those bases. I had observed that the demand for mathematics courses was much greater than it was for psychology courses. So to keep me employed in that, I had gotten permission from the math department to teach freshman mathematics classes, giving me a solid permanent assignment. I took advantage of this opportunity probably for the next 25 or 30 years. In 1951, I was promoted from teaching assistant to a part-time instructor, giving me faculty status. In 53, my teaching and graduate students were rudely interrupted by a call to active duty from the United States Air Force. I was granted military leave of absence and guaranteed a similar position upon my return from active duty. I served in a behavioral research laboratory from April of 1953 to May 1956. Upon my return from active duty to Florida State, Dean Reynolds asked me if I would spend the summer directing and teaching in the bootstrap program at Eglin Air Force Base in Fort Walton. Before driving over there from Tallahassee, Dr. Reynolds had actually helped me buy a house in Tallahassee on Jackson Bluff Road, and I specify that for a reason that soon will become clear. Meanwhile, Liz and I and our new son moved into a small apartment in Fort Walton. We settled in there and were beginning to adjust to civilian life. One afternoon, there was a knock on our door at the apartment, and there stood a young man who said, "Hi, I'm Bob Lawton." I had no idea who he was. I really thought that he was some kind of a salesman, maybe insurance or something. We talked. He came in and sat down with us. And at one point, very soon, he mentioned Paul Reynolds. So then I began to suspect that he was somehow associated with the university and the College of Arts and Sciences. He said he was just over for one day and had to go back to Tallahassee the next day. But he never told me who he was or what his position was. We talked and talked late into the afternoon, and Liz said, "Would you stay and have supper with us?" And he said, "I thought you would never ask." After supper, my wife, Liz, said, "You guys can sit there and watch TV, but I'm watching Cheyenne on the tube." Years after we had known the Lawtons very well, Bob never failed to tell the story about Liz and Cheyenne. We watched Cheyenne, and then we talked some more. And finally, Liz said, "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" And he said, once again, "I thought you'd never ask." She fixed up the couch. Bob Lawton slept on the couch, ate breakfast the next morning, and was off to Tallahassee. As soon as he was out of sight, I called Dean Reynolds and said, "Who was that guy?" And Reynolds said, "He is your boss. I hope you treated him well." At the end of the summer, we moved into our new home on Jackson Bluff Road. I had rented a U-Haul truck and had hired Paul Reynolds Jr. to help me drive over to Fort Walton to get our furniture. We got back to Tallahassee and just turned into our driveway when a car screeched to a stop in front of our house, and out stepped Bob Lawton. He had just flown home from Puerto Rico, and Elise, his wife, was driving him home from the airport, which was located right down at the foot of Jackson Bluff Road. "Are you going to live here?" he said. "Give us 10 minutes and we'll go home, change our clothes, and come back and help you move." And indeed, that's what they did. And after we got the furniture into the house, he and Elise said, "Why don't you come over to our house and have supper with us?" This was the beginning of a beautiful and long-lasting friendship. We went to movies and plays and concerts together and had lots of long meals at both houses. One important event occurred and made a big impact on our developing friendship. Bob, Elise, and Liz and I set out one evening to attend a lecture given by a Methodist minister who was on campus for a week during what they called Religious Emphasis Week. There was a confusion among the four of us about the location of this lecture, and the truth is that we never made it to the lecture. While we were having coffee at a local restaurant, Bob Lawton told us that he had made a serious promise to a professor that he did not know by the name of Ray Sheline to go to his house for a reception for the speaker. We all told Bob that we couldn't do that if we hadn't attended the lecture. Bob felt guilty enough about it and convinced us that we should go to Professor Ray Sheline's to attend this reception. We went, and we were quickly forgiven for our absence, and we started talking with the group. This minister, a man named Thaxton Springfield, was encouraging us to form small discussion groups on campus made up of different academic disciplines to discuss topics, the topic of which was totally unlimited. Ray Sheline was very excited about this possibility, and he was a very determined person. There were 8 couples involved, and we agreed that evening to give it a try. We met the following Monday night, and then we met the following Monday night, and the following Monday night for the next 25 years. I tell this story to say that regardless of our changes in our lives over that time, we saw Bob and Elise Lawton every Monday night. The Lawtons and the Smiths built vacation homes on Higdon Mountain in North Carolina. So we were blessed to share so many parts of our lives with these truly outstanding people. Let me say a thing or two about Bob Lawton. Bob was born in Greenwood, South Carolina. He attended Wofford College for a couple of years, and then he enlisted in the Army Infantry and rose to the rank of sergeant. He engaged in serious combat in Germany. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for singular action, outstanding courage, and extreme devotion to duty. He was subsequently wounded, and it was quite serious, and he spent months in military hospitals in England and then in the United States. He was disabled to a limited extent, but his colleagues and friends were totally unaware even of his military experience. In the hours and hours of conversations I had with Bob Lawton, he never mentioned his experience in the Army. He enrolled at Duke University, where he received his A.B., his master's, and his Ph.D. degrees in English literature. In March of 1949, Bob Lawton initiated a correspondence with Dr. William Hudson Rogers, who was chairman of the English department at FSU. This exchange of letters led to an offer to Bob Lawton in a letter from President Doak Campbell in July the 12th, 1949. He arrived that fall and began teaching in the English department. Like many other young faculty, he commuted one night a week to teach in the bootstrap program, where he earned well-needed money. Dr. Joshua Paul Reynolds took Bob into this program and helped him during some hard financial times. In 1952, due to budget cuts, Bob's appointment in the English department was not renewed. Paul Reynolds arranged for Bob to move to Eglin Air Force Base in Fort Walton Beach to direct and teach in the bootstrap program there. He did that for 2 years, and then in 1954, he moved to the Air Force Base, Ramey Base, in Puerto Rico, and he did the same thing there until 1956. In 1956, Paul brought him back to the FSU campus and appointed him as the director of this entire bootstrap program. That was the position he held when he came to Eglin in that summer of 1956, where he never told me, "I'm your boss, and I'm over here to inspect what you're doing at Eglin Air Force Base." He held that position as the director of the bootstrap program, in spite of doing many other things during the next few years. He was housed in the College of Arts and Sciences, and Dean Reynolds made Bob a part of the College of Arts and Sciences, and he had many other duties besides directing the bootstrap program. He also affiliated with the English department and went through the promotion process and rose in ranks in the English department. When Paul Reynolds retired, President John Champion appointed Bob as the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. He was truly a great dean. He had a vision for the college, and he saw that programs moved forward. His quiet but strong leadership made him extremely well-liked and respected by the faculty and the staff. Under his leadership and with the loyal support of the faculty of the College of Arts and Sciences, he led the university in its quest for excellence and set its academic tone. The college flourished, and under Bob's direction, interdisciplinary programs sprung up all over. Among these programs were the Nuclear Research Program, the Psychobiology Research Center, the Institute of Fluid Dynamics, the Institute of Molecular Biophysics, and the Institute for Social Research and the Theater Arts Program. He participated in the development of the London and the Florence programs, which provided students the opportunity to study abroad. The Oriental and Slavic Area Studies program also was developed, and he introduced the whole concept of urban and regional planning. Most of all, the faculty and staff recognized his personal warmth that he extended toward his colleagues. He didn't eat lunch with the other deans. He ate lunch with the faculty. And through his years as the dean of the college, he was truly loved. It was a shocking moment for the college when, on December the 22nd, 1972, Christmas break, faculty scattered, President Stanley Marshall called Bob Lawton into his office and abruptly fired him without any explanation. When questioned by the reporters, Marshall said, "I am exercising the prerogative of a president to select his own chief administrator and to make such changes as he deems necessary." Obviously, he said, I thought a change would strengthen the College of Arts and Sciences and the university generally. None of us could understand how the college could be strengthened. Needless to say, the faculty and staff of the college were strongly disagreed with President Marshall. No further explanation was ever given for the dismissal of Bob Lawton. In the following days and months, the most calm member of the College of Arts and Sciences was Bob Lawton. He accepted the decision, returned to the English department, and took up his duties and swore that he would try to be a professor. He began to do research, and he developed a book on Francis Beaumont, and he began to teach, and the next thing you knew, he was receiving teaching awards every place he went. The faculty would not let it go, and they had numerous receptions and meetings for Bob Lawton. The 22 divisional chairs of the college wrote the following: whereas the current sound status and educational efficiency of the College of Arts and Sciences are owing in large part to the leadership quality of its former dean, and whereas the dean has seen fit, under the request of President Marshall, to submit his resignation, be it therefore resolved that the members of the Joint Division Committees on Academic Affairs, Policy Committee of College of Arts and Sciences express their unanimous appreciation for the 6.5 years of inspiring leadership granted to the college by the former dean, Robert O. Lawton. He will be sorely missed, for among numerous other things, his openness to wise change and his effectiveness in carrying constructive proposals to full, fruitful implementation. The distinguished professors on campus also recorded their esteem and appreciation for Bob's years as dean. They wrote, his constructive leadership through years of change and rapid growth in the college exhibited flexibility, innovation, and understanding. We express our regard for Robert O. Lawton, a most effective administrative officer, the very high national standing of the Arts and Sciences graduate programs in recent years given by the American Council on Education, and undergraduate programs that are a measure of his high contribution. We express our enthusiastic and sincere best wishes for the fruitful continuation of Robert Lawton's academic career as one of our esteemed colleagues in this university. And these people were sure that President Marshall received copies of all of these commendations. Bob Lawton made a tremendous contribution to the English department. He taught Shakespearean and Elizabethan drama and was incredibly popular as a teacher. My favorite story from one of his teaching evaluations was a comment from one of his students who said, "Before Lawton, I believed in God and Bach. After Lawton, I believed in God, Bach, and Shakespeare." Bob, as I said earlier, began and completed a book on the playwright Francis Beaumont. He served on the faculty senate, and he served on the steering committee and participated in the Shakespeare Association of America. He was inducted into Omicron Delta Kappa, an honorary society for scholarly and service work in the university. He was tapped for the FSU Honor Society Gold Key. He received the Ross Oglesby Man of the Year Award from the university. Meanwhile, President Marshall totally reorganized the structure of the university and started apparently what his pet project was of stripping the College of Arts and Sciences apart. He removed all of the social sciences from arts and sciences, and his approval by the faculty reached a new low. In 1977, the faculty senate had a committee to evaluate his performance, and he received a 97% disapproval rate by the university faculty. He resigned shortly thereafter, and his executive vice president, Bernard Schleicher, took over. People were suspect of Schleicher because he had served with Marshall, but Schleicher, when he got in, immediately appointed a committee headed by Professor Irv Sobel in social sciences to, quote, put the university organization back to normal. I served on Irv's committee, and they made profound changes back to the original organizational chart of the university. In September the 20th in 1977, President Bernard Schleicher pulled Bob Lawton away from the English department and appointed him as provost of the university, saying, his proven administrative leadership has convinced me that he is the right person for this important command position. President Schleicher cemented himself as a great president by the College of Arts and Sciences. Both Elise's and Bob's calendars were crammed full, and we did not see as much of them as we did before. His authority was used for good of the university, and he was always Bob Lawton. He made time for the Monday night group, and we still shared what little time we could put together on the mountain in North Carolina. The next 3 years seemed to go by extremely fast. Once again, however, Bob Lawton's tenure as leader of the Florida State University came to an abrupt ending. Bob and Elise's son and daughter-in-law had their first baby. Elise flew up to Huntsville, where Bob Jr. was a professor of tropical biology, and Elise went to help Marcy with the new baby. Bob drove up there from Tallahassee a few days later to see and visit with his first grandson and drive Elise back to Tallahassee. He made the trip and was only a few blocks from Bob Jr.'s home when his car was hit by a person speeding from another accident, and Bob's spine was severed at the cervical level, and he was paralyzed from the neck down. We communicated daily with Elise for about 4 weeks, and she said, I can handle this, don't come. And after about 4 weeks, she called us and said, I would really appreciate it if you would come and spend some time with me. We drove to Huntsville, and only once during the time of that visit we were allowed to see Bob. He was in intensive care in a funny kind of rocker bed and appeared to be in a deep sleep. After a little while, he opened his eyes and he looked up and he saw Liz and he smiled and he said, Mercy. We knew that he recognized Liz because Mercy was Liz's response to Bob when he told her something that she thought was unusual or fantastic. She would always say to him, Mercy. And over the years, he teased her about it. So we knew that he at least had recognized Liz. 4 weeks later, he died. There was a beautiful funeral service for Bob at Trinity Methodist Church in Tallahassee, where Bob and Elise had been members for many years. A couple of members of the Monday night group who were professors of religion at Florida State participated in this funeral service. And I want to quote what Bob Spivey said. Bob Lawton thrived on humor. Beneath those shaggy eyebrows, there was usually a twinkle and a smile. He liked to laugh, not at others, but with them. His humor came from his profound enjoyment of life. Whether a committee meeting, a budget session, a classroom of students, a walk in the woods, a canoe trip, a conversation with his wife, his friends, his children, their spouses, and their friends, his greatest delight and fascination was with other people. He was never too busy to respond. Relaxation began and ended with a chair, indeed almost dissolved with a cup of coffee at hand. He loved to talk and listen. He took others quite seriously, while not taking himself too seriously. At home, church, the university, he was a rock and a rudder, because he had a clear vision of where we should be going and how we should get there. His commitment to excellence and quality followed the tradition of Robert Strozier, a former president of the university, making Bob one of the giants in helping to shape and serve the greatness of the Florida State University. Physically slight, there was nothing fluffy or weightless about him. He possessed as little ambition for himself as any leader I have ever known, and yet he was ambitious as possible for the university. Moreover, he did not allow his work to dominate his life. There was always time for the mountains, the outdoors, for loved ones and friends. Shortly after the change of the year in 1981, I received a call from President Bernie Schleicher asking me to come to his office. He told me that he needed to have some kind of service to give him closure on Bob's death, some kind of service on the campus. He said, needless to say, this service needs to be approved by the Lawton family. He asked me to plan such a service. He appointed a committee to work with me on this, but my first task was to approach Elise about his desire. I went to Elise, and she emphatically said that she could not go through another service, and for me to tell Bernie, no, no, no. I went back to the president, told him what Elise had said, and he looked at me and smiled and said, yes, 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 I have got to have this. Work it out, Jim. I presented this to the committee and told them that my dilemma between my president and my dear friend Elise was hard to deal with. In our deliberations, we decided that it would be nice to try to name something for Bob Lawton that would give his memory to the university. And it had to have emphasis on quality and excellence. And we began to think, what could be greater than to tie it with the distinguished professors? The name of distinguished professors could be Robert O. Lawton Distinguished Professors. And we would retroactively rename all of the previous distinguished professors as Robert O. Lawton Distinguished Professors. And we would bring in all the old ones in their academic regalia, and we would christen them as Robert O. Lawton Distinguished Professors. At the same time, that the president would name the new Lawton professor that would be coming on at that time in 1981. The idea grew, and we developed it, and I took it to Bernie, and he liked it and gave it his approval, and Elise liked it. So we had a ceremony to the new distinguished professor and name that person a Lawton Distinguished Professor with all of the other former distinguished professors standing by. I don't remember all the members of that committee, but I clearly remember Fred Stanley in English, who said, "I'll work on the program." Jim Melton from the Alumni Association said, "I will take care of the publicity." And Bob Glidden, who was the dean of the School of Music at that time, said, "I will take care of the venue." I don't remember this very clearly, but I know that Fred Stanley thought that we should run this by the Faculty Senate, which he did. And in March of 1981, the Senate gave their approval for renaming the former distinguished professors as Robert O. Lawton Distinguished Professors. The official ceremony took place in Opperman on May the 27th of 1981. It was a beautiful service, and a copy of that service will be made available for others to read. But the one thing I remember most profoundly about it is that Bob Lawton loved Eddie Kellini, who was a professor of piano in the music school, and he played a beautiful Chopin piece at that meeting. The new Lawton professor, who happened to be Robert Gilmer from the mathematics department, was appointed at that time. Years passed, and Bob Lawton's name was not forgotten. For each year, there was a new Lawton professor. In 1992, I was sitting in my office with Sandra Frankman, a visiting scientist from Cornell Medical School, when I answered a phone call from President Dale Lick. He told me that I would be the Lawton professor for that year. As was typical, I was not able to tell anyone, with the exception of your wife. And I said, "Mr. President, I have one other person that I would like to tell." He granted me that. I called Liz to tell her, but I got in the car and I went straight to Randolph Circle, where Elise Lawton lived. She was dying from cancer and was sticking pretty close to home. I went to the back door as usual, and she was standing in the kitchen. She waved me in, and I told her the news. She threw her arms around my neck, and her wig fell off on the floor. I picked it up, unfortunately put it on backwards. Neither she nor I cared one bit as we stood there weeping. What a wonderful thing to be able to share with her only a few weeks before she died. We had limited contact with Bob Lawton Jr., but extensive contact with Elise Bates Lawton Smith, who is an art history professor at Millsaps College in Mississippi. She and her husband Steve are both first-class scholars and distinguished professors there at their college. She presented Liz with a beautiful leather coat that was Elise's. So on cold days when Liz wears that coat, we feel quite close to Elise. I now want to say just a few brief things about what it means to be a Lawton professor. I, of course, had special reasons to be very humbled and excited about becoming a Lawton professor. I was immediately rewarded by my fellow Lawton professors, people like Ray Sheline and Michael Kasha and Harry Wolborski. Many others followed from the Lawton group, and I felt like I had joined some kind of royal society, knowing all of them. I was also most grateful to my dear friend and colleague Mike Rashad for doing the hard work of organizing my nomination folder. They gave me that folder with all the letters and so forth. I just didn't want to read them at that time. I kept them for over a year. And I took them to my mountain house in North Carolina, sat in the warm sun one day on the deck, looking out over the mountains, and read all of these letters that I had received and all of the folders. There were lots of tears, and I could not believe the effort that Mike had made to put together that folder. When I came off my high, I began to think that becoming a Lawton professor, that things were expected of you. And this feeling got very profound when I was asked to serve on the next selection committee for the Lawton professor. I read the folders of professors who were from the same pool of candidates as I was. One folder in particular stood out to me, that of J. Setharaman from the statistics department. That folder, by any objective standard, was truly outstanding, and why I got the nod the previous year over him remains a mystery to me to this day. J. Setharaman was selected the next year, and I called him and said, "I'd like to take you to lunch." That was a memorable event. And Sethu, as he asked me to call him, who was from India and a devout Hindu, I got him to tell me about his life, and the story was truly amazing. Sethu and I have had many, many more lunches since that time. One such lunch we had led to a stunning thing as far as the Lawton professorship was concerned. He told me that he had an appointment with the provost and the president, and he wanted me to go with him. I thought that he was going to be on the committee and he wanted to have some assurance as to what he should be looking for and so forth, but I had no idea. After some small talk and meeting with President D'Alembert and Provost Larry Abel, the president said to Sethu, "What was it you wanted to talk to us about?" And Sethu said, "Oh, Jim talks much better than I do. I will let him tell you." I was stunned because I had no idea what he had in mind. After I composed myself, I wanted to tell the president and the provost the difference in the experience that I had after receiving the Lawton Award and what Sethu had had. He did not receive a lot of commendation from his colleagues, and he didn't really understand what had happened to him. I complained to the president and the provost that this secrecy business about not telling anyone was not really the way to do this. I said that graduates and their parents at graduation don't care that much about who becomes the distinguished professor at the university. It's the faculty that cares. This should be announced to the faculty and not wait until after commencement to announce it. And it never got announced anyplace unless the Tallahassee Democrat decided to publish it. There were times when it was 2 or 3 weeks before I even found out who would be the distinguished professor. And I told him, I said, the year after that, I received the University Distinguished Teaching Award. And I said the stipend for that was even more than it was for the Lawton Award. So if the Lawton Award is to be the highest honor, it ought to be treated as the highest honor. Larry and Sandy jumped right on it. And before we walked out of their office, every Lawton professor received a $10,000 pay raise. When I left the president's office, I asked Sethu, "What was your agenda? What did you want to talk to them about?" And he said, "Oh, Jim, you covered it very well." And with a twinkle in his eye and a smile, that was the end of that conversation. And I never knew what Sethu had in his mind. One more thing I learned about Sethu is worth noting. Sethu studies and writes poetry in Sanskrit. In fact, he told me that his real profession was study of Sanskrit. He just did statistics to earn a living. What a brilliant man and what a privilege to have him as a friend. The next year, Kurt Hofer received the Lawton Award. Kurt was from Austria, and his many brothers were all bankers. Kurt was a radiation biologist, and he and I had collaborated on a project that grew from an insight Kurt had about a problem that we've been struggling with in my lab. Kurt and I, along with one of my postdocs and graduate students, published a paper in Science together. So I knew Kurt, but Sethu and I took Kurt to lunch. The next year, Janet Burraway received the Lawton Award, and Sethu and Kurt and I took Janet to lunch. Janet had written several successful novels. In our conversation, I told her it had been years since I had read a novel, and needless to say, the next day on my desk was a novel that Janet had written called Cutting Stone. It was a historical novel that started in the East, wound up in the West. I remember one vivid sexual scene. I had never read a novel where I knew the author. A very interesting experience. The next year, Joe Travis received the award, and Sethu and Kurt and Janet and I took Joe to lunch. The next year, DeWitt Sumners was the new Lawton professor. Sethu, Kurt, Janet, Joe, and I took DeWitt to lunch. DeWitt told us about his work with string theory, and as much as I tried, I could never, ever follow DeWitt. And thank God he had colleagues around the world that did understand his important work. This string of Lawton professors went on and on over the next few years. When it got to Kirby Kemper, once again those lunches started, and they went on and on with Kirby Kemper. And Kirby and I have lunch together quite often with Mark and with Jorge, my physics friends, as I call them, always at Jim and Milt's. Next, there was David Kirby, a poet from the English department. And David is going to contribute to our remembrances of Bob Lawton because he worked closely with him when he was in the provost's office. David gave me a copy of his book called What is a Book, a volume that I treasure. Year after year, new Lawton professors were selected, but after David Kirby, no one was selected that year. I was angry. I was steamed. I went to Larry Abel's office to blow off my steam, and Larry told me to calm down and go see Kirby Kemper. Turns out Kirby had been the chairman of the selection committee that year, and the committee had agreed that they had no nominees who were worthy of an appointment. A first since 1957, 47 years, and there was no Lawton professor. At that meeting, Kirby appointed me as chairman of a Lawton committee to explore why and to do something about it. The why seemed very obvious to me. That year, the university is to get overdue pay increases for a large number of full professors. The administration opened up a program to a select group of named professors. A professor could apply for this award and, if selected, get the same pay increment as a Lawton professor. I don't know how many names were selected, but there were many of them. Once again, the Lawton professorship was not, by that standard, the highest that a faculty member could receive. And so our committee once again met with the president and the provost. This meeting was much livelier than it was when Sethu and I had our meeting before. The result of that 2004 meeting, the benefits of becoming a Lawton professor increased significantly. In addition, President Weatherall decided that a monument for Bob Lawton should be placed in front of Strozier Library, on which Lawton professors' names would be engraved each year. That monument was dedicated in January of 2006. Kirby and I were sort of in charge of that. And it was a brief ceremony. I was asked to make a few comments about Bob Lawton, and retired President Bernie Schleicher and Matthew Smith, Bob Lawton's grandson, unveiled the obelisk. A video of that ceremony can be found at due to health problems for several years, my lunches with new Lawton professors came to a halt. I did nominate my colleague Rick Wagner for a Lawton after I got out of the hospital, and he received that honor in 2009. I got a strong taste of what it took to put together a folder, and my esteem for my colleague Mike Richat rose even higher. A recently appointed Lawton professor Professor Jeff Chanton. Jeff's wife, Sue, was Elite Lawton Smith's college roommate. Last year before last, I took Pam Parawee to lunch. Pam received the Lawton Award, and she joined the faculty and had her outstanding career all after Bob Lawton had died. She knew about Bob Lawton, but she didn't know him. I spent a few hours talking to Pam and telling her some of the stories I have just related. Professor Tim Cross was last year's Lawton professor, and Pam and I took Tim to lunch, and I hope we've started a new chain. It is incredibly rewarding to know and become friends with such an outstanding group of faculty across many disciplines. I once again thank my colleague Mark Riley for saying to me when I said, "I have a story to tell. I would like to hear your story." Bob Lawton would be extremely pleased to have his name associated with these outstanding scholars.